There was no way I'd move into his place. He felt the same about mine. While I was picking out china patterns, our Real Living agent organized it all. She worked around my schedule, and the florist, and the in-laws. She even listed our old places online. Mine sold first, of course. We didn't have to compromise anything until we moved in.
Hey class! We chose to do our research project on HER Realtors. We were able to get in contact with the head of the company, Harley Ruda, who agreed to launch our survey. HER is a real estate brokerage based in Columbus, Ohio, and employs about 5,000 people. Being a large company, our goal was to take advantage of their numbers and benefit our survey. The company was founded in 1956 and continues to grow today.
This is Tara. She is an example of an adopter. In relation to our study, an adopter is an individual who actively uses a Facebook account. Here we have Natasha Luckenhaus. Unlike Tara, she does not have an active Facebook account, and she is currently contemplating whether or not to make one. She chooses not to, and instead goes to Google, making her a resistor. Clearly, as Alex walks by, she thinks she's a loser.
Our first research question stated, does the amount of education an individual has have a direct link to the amount of time spent on Facebook during work? An article on abc.com by Mike Flacey showed that approximately 33% of employees admit to using social networking in the workplace, 45% of these networking sites being Facebook. Therefore, our first hypothesis is employees with more education are less inclined to use Facebook during work hours. For our second research question, we asked, does gender influence the amount of time that is spent on Facebook? After reading several articles on gender and Facebook use, we were able to formulate our second hypothesis, which is, there is no significant difference between gender and the amount of time spent on Facebook. Our third research question stated, is there a correlation between age, employment duration, and Facebook usage? Our hypothesis for this research question was that employees who are younger and have had a shorter employment with HER would utilize Facebook in the workplace more often. And finally, for our fourth and final research question, we asked, does gender affect a user's perceived popularity on Facebook? We hypothesized that females would perceive themselves as more popular on Facebook.
According to Baxter and Babby, because all of our participants' data was able to be quantified and put into numerical lists, the quantitative method is appropriate. After speaking with Harley Ruda, we were put into contact with Jim, an employee at the Columbus, Ohio headquarters. Harley and Jim worked together to release the survey to all the employees. After about a week, we had 30 responses, but we were still hoping to get more. Tara sent a reminder to Jim, and Jim sent out another email reminding the employees the deadline was approaching. A few days later, we had a total of 47 responses, and we closed our survey because we had sufficient data. First, we analyzed the raw data from our survey. We reversed the responses for the questions that were coded as needing reverse responses. We then coded the columns based on the survey questions they corresponded with. An example was IFU 9, which stood for Intensity of Facebook Use, question number 9. We will present each SPSS procedure that was run by presenting them with each research question they correspond with.
For research question 1, we ran an ANOVA test. The first step is to click Analyze, then Compare Means, and then click One-Way ANOVA. We then put D78, which was level of education, as the dependent, and then we put IFU 9, which was time spent on Facebook, as the factor. The results showed that the F value was 0.805 and that the P value was 0.501. The P value was insignificant because it is above the significant level of 0.05, and therefore level of education is not significantly related to time spent on Facebook. For research question 2, we did a t-test. To do this, click Analyze, then Compare Means, then Independent Sample t-test. We put IFU 9, which was time spent on Facebook, as the test variable, and D75, which was gender, as the grouping variable. We defined D79 into 1 and 2 to represent the difference in gender. The results were that the p-value was 0.974, which is also insignificant. For research question 3, we used the test of regression. To do this, click Analyze, then Regression, then Linear. We put IFU 9, which was time spent on Facebook, as the dependent variable, and we put D76, which was age, and D74, years of employment with HER, into the independent variables. For results, we went to the model summary where R was 0.166. The R squared value indicates how much the dependent variable can be explained by the independent variables. In other words, how much Facebook usage can be explained by age and employment duration. In this case, the R squared value accounts for 28%, which is relatively low. Looking now at the ANOVA table in the results, the p-value is 0.648, which means that it is also not significant. This means that age or employment duration is not a significant factor in predicting Facebook usage. For research question 4, we used another t-test. We put D75, which was gender, into the grouping variable, and I32, which was perceived popularity, into the test variables. The results were that the p-value was 0.492, which is also insignificant.
For our first hypothesis, our findings proved that our hypothesis was incorrect. There was no statistical significance between education and use of Facebook. For hypothesis 2, our findings supported our hypothesis. It showed that there was no statistical difference between gender and the amount of time spent on Facebook. For hypothesis 3, our research proved this to be incorrect. There was no statistical significance between age, employment duration, and use of Facebook. And finally, for hypothesis 4, this was also proven incorrect. There was no statistical significance for a female perceiving herself as more popular as opposed to males in regards to their Facebook usage. The purpose of our study was to see how employees of the company HER in Columbus, Ohio utilized Facebook. As previously stated, none of our findings were statistically significant. We believe that this is a direct result of the data that was collected. As seen in the frequency distribution analysis, many of the responses were similar and there was little variation. This made it extremely difficult to find any significance within the data. One of our limitations was that there was only one respondent who did not have an active Facebook account. This made it difficult for any findings to be statistically significant, creating a poor representation of the general working population. With the recent merger of HER and other companies, it was difficult to accurately assess the total amount of employees within the company. Lastly, another limitation was that we were only able to survey an HER office in Ohio, which does not represent the company and its many branches as a whole. Our findings suggest that while the majority of our participants, all but one, have an active Facebook account, their usage of Facebook in the workplace is minimal. This implies that Realty employees don't utilize Facebook during office hours and could lead to further research regarding whether or not they spend much time interacting with coworkers outside of the workplace.
We want to thank HER for their participation in this survey, and we hope that future research can be done within the industry. The end.